Have you ever felt that your entire life was built on a single, beautiful lie? That the ground beneath your feet, the air you breathed, was all just a carefully constructed illusion? I did. For 24 years, I lived inside that lie. My name is Alara, and I was an orphan. My past a closed book, my future a question mark. I believed my parents were taken from me in a tragic, unavoidable accident, a twist of fate, a cruel joke of the universe. But I was wrong. It wasn't fate. It wasn't an accident. It was a choice. A choice made by a family so powerful, so rich, they believed they could simply erase their sins and walk away untouched. They didn't know about me. They didn't know the orphan they left behind would one day learn their secret. And I didn't know that to get my revenge, I would have to become one of them. My earliest memory is not of a lullaby, but of silence. The silence of the Lindenbrook orphanage. It wasn't a cruel place, just empty. A place where hope went to fade. The other children and I, we were like little ghosts floating through the halls, our histories a blank page. The matron, a kind but weary woman named Agnes, would sometimes try to fill in the blanks for me. "Your parents, Alara," she'd say, her voice soft as old velvet, "they loved you very much. They were in a car accident, a terrible, sudden thing. They were gone before anyone could help. I built them in my mind, my parents. My father had a laugh that could light up a room. My mother sang songs she made up on the spot. They were my secret guardians, my invisible comfort in the cold nights. I clung to that story. It was the only thing I had. But even the strongest chains can break. On my 18th birthday, I was officially aged out of the system. I was given a small box, all that remained of my past. Inside was a faded photograph of my parents, their faces young and smiling, forever frozen in time, and tucked into the back of the frame, a single folded piece of paper. It was a news clipping, yellowed and brittle. The headline was simple: "Local couple perishes in late-night collision." My heart hammered against my ribs as I read the short article. It mentioned the other car, a luxury vehicle that had swerved into their lane. The driver, the article said, was a prominent local businessman, Alistair Blackwood. He and his family had walked away with minor injuries. The case was closed, ruled an accident. Prominent local businessman. The words burned into my soul. While my world ended, his simply continued. A cold, hard stone of anger settled in my stomach. This was no longer a tragedy. It was an injustice. For the next 6 years, I lived and breathed one purpose: the Blackwoods. I worked 2 jobs, saved every penny, and in the dark hours of the night, I became a ghost in the machine. I devoured every piece of information I could find about them. Alistair Blackwood, the patriarch, a titan of industry with a smile that never reached his eyes. His wife, Eleanor, a socialite whose life was a curated exhibit of charity galas and designer clothes. Their children, Julian, the arrogant heir apparent, and Cassandra, the spoiled princess who had never heard the word no. They lived in a world of gilded gates and private security, a world I could only observe from the outside. Until I found her, a girl my age, with hair the same shade of chestnut brown as mine. Her name was Maya. She had been hired as a junior archivist for the Blackwood Foundation, a nobody to them, a doorway for me. I studied her. I learned her routines, her shy mannerisms, her background. She was quiet, from a small town, with no family in the city. The perfect candidate. The plan formed in my mind, a dark and twisted thing. It was dangerous. It was insane. But it was the only way. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. I learned that Maya was leaving her position to care for a sick relative overseas. She was giving her notice. This was my window.
I used my savings to transform myself. I cut and dyed my hair to match hers exactly. I practiced her speech patterns, her gait. I became Maya. The day of my interview at the Blackwood estate was the most terrifying of my life. As the iron gates swung open, I felt like I was walking into the lion's den. The main house wasn't a house. It was a fortress of wealth, all cold marble and glittering glass. I was led to a study, a room that smelled of old leather and expensive cigars. And there he was, Alistair Blackwood. He looked older than in his pictures, his hair silvered at the temples, but his gaze was just as sharp. He looked at me, this Maya, and I saw no flicker of recognition, no ghost of guilt. Why would he? I was just another faceless employee. "Miss Evans," he said, his voice a low rumble, "your references are adequate. The position is simple. Organize the Foundation's historical records. You will report to my daughter, Cassandra. Do not bother her. Do not impress her. Just be invisible. Can you do that?" I lowered my eyes, mimicking Maya's timid demeanor. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood. Absolutely. Good. You start Monday." And just like that, I was in. The first pawn had been placed on the board. And I walked out of that mansion, my heart wasn't just pounding with fear, it was thrumming with a dark, vengeful purpose. They had destroyed my family, and now I was going to destroy theirs from the inside. But as I would soon learn, the walls of this gilded cage held more secrets than I could have ever imagined, and the first secret was named Julian.
The first day inside the Blackwood mansion felt like stepping onto a stage in a play I had only ever watched from the cheap seats. Every sound echoed, every glance felt like an interrogation. I was Maya Evans, the new mousy archivist, a creature of shadows and silence. My domain was a small, windowless office adjacent to the main library, a room filled with the dust of their forgotten history. It was the perfect place to listen, to learn. My official supervisor was Cassandra Blackwood. She was everything I expected and worse, a hurricane of entitlement and boredom. She swept into my office on my second day, a vision of designer contempt. "You're the new mouse, are you?" she said, not even looking at me as she inspected a shelf. "Don't touch my things, don't speak to my friends, and if you see my brother, Julian, you turn and walk the other way. He has a thing for strays." She finally looked at me, her eyes a cold, piercing blue. "Understood?" I simply nodded, biting the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. The anger was a living thing inside me, but I caged it. This was for my parents. This was for the little girl in the orphanage who cried herself to sleep. But Cassandra's warning about her brother proved both prescient and complicated. I first saw Julian Blackwood not in a boardroom, but in the garden. He was sitting on a stone bench, not reading a financial report, but sketching in a pad. He looked different, softer than the photos I'd seen. There was a sadness in his eyes that didn't belong on the face of a man who had everything. Our first real interaction was an accident. I was carrying a heavy box of old financial records, my real target, and I stumbled on the Persian rug in the main hall. The box flew from my hands, papers scattering everywhere like confetti. I froze, expecting a torrent of fury. But instead, a calm voice said, "Here, let me help you." It was Julian. He was already on his knees, gathering the papers. He didn't call a servant. He didn't berate me. He just helped. "You're the new archivist, right, Maya?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Yes, sir," I mumbled, keeping my head down. "Don't call me sir. Julian is fine." He stacked the papers neatly and handed them to me. Our fingers brushed, and a jolt, entirely unwelcome, shot through me. "My sister hasn't scared you off yet, I hope." "She's been very clear," I said carefully. He gave a wry smile. "That's Cassandra. Look, this house, it can be a lot. If you need anything, just don't ask me. Ask Mrs. Davison, the housekeeper. She's the one who actually runs this place." He winked, and for a terrifying second, I saw not the enemy, but a man. A man trapped in the same gilded cage as I was, just in a much nicer part of it. It was a complication I hadn't anticipated. The heir, the son of the man who killed my parents, was kind. It threatened to humanize them, to blur the sharp, clean lines of my hatred. I had to remind myself constantly, this was the son of the man who walked away from my parents' wreckage. His kindness was a luxury my parents were never afforded. My nights were spent in my small, rented apartment, cross-referencing the information I discreetly photographed during the day. The Blackwood Foundation was a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore accounts. It was while tracing one of these financial threads that I found it, the first crack in their perfect facade. It was an old insurance document buried deep in a file from the year my parents died. It was a massive secret payout from a private policy, not linked to any of their known businesses. The beneficiary was a shell company, and the date of the incident listed was exactly 1 week after my parents' accident. My blood ran cold. This wasn't about covering up car repairs. This was hush money. This was a payment to someone or for something directly related to what they had done. Alistair Blackwood hadn't just walked away from an accident. He had paid to make it disappear. The discovery should have filled me with triumph. Instead, it filled me with a deeper, more profound sorrow. My parents' lives, reduced to a line item in a secret account. The stone of anger in my gut grew heavier, colder. I became more daring. I started taking longer lunches in the garden, knowing it was where Julian often went to escape. Our chance encounters became more frequent. We talked about books, about art, about nothing of consequence. And with each conversation, the mask of Maya began to feel heavier. I found myself actually liking his dry humor, his quiet intelligence. He confessed he hated the family business, that he dreamed of being an architect. "He'd done a stum tires of money," he said one afternoon, staring at the family mansion with a look of distaste. "I want to build something that lasts, something beautiful." I looked at him, this man who represented everything I was supposed to destroy, and I felt a terrifying pull. A connection. Was it real? Or was I just a brilliant actress falling for her own performance? The line was blurring, and that was more dangerous than any of Alistair Blackwood's security systems. The turning point came during a family dinner. I was working late, and as I passed the grand dining room, I heard raised voices. I pressed myself against the wall, hidden in the shadows. "It's getting out of hand, Alistair." It was Eleanor's voice, sharp with a fear I hadn't heard before. "That reporter has been sniffing around again, asking about the old days, about the Foundation's early years." "Calm yourself, Eleanor." Alistair's voice was a whip crack. "It was handled then. It will be handled now. That chapter is closed, buried." "But what if it's not?" Julian's voice cut in, surprising me. "What if someone digs it up? What exactly are we so afraid of?" The silence that followed was deafening. I could almost feel the chill from where I stood. "Some graves," Alistair said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper, "are best left undisturbed. For the sake of this family. Do you understand?" I slipped away, my heart thundering. They were afraid. They were hiding something much bigger than a covered-up accident. I had come for revenge for a car crash, but I was now standing at the edge of a much darker abyss. What other grave were they so desperate to keep buried? And was I prepared to unearth it, even if it meant destroying the one person in this house who had shown me a shred of kindness? The human heart is a treacherous compass. It's supposed to point you toward safety, toward light. But mine was spinning wildly, caught between the magnetic pull of a righteous vengeance and the unexpected gravity of Julian's kindness. Every smile he gave Maya, every shared quiet moment in the garden, felt like a betrayal of my true self, of the little girl I had been. I was lying to him, yes, but in a way I never expected.
It started to feel like I was lying to myself, too. The tension in the house was a thick, poisonous fog. Alistar was more irritable, Eleanor more tightly wound. Cassandra, sensing the shift, became even more vicious. She seemed to take particular pleasure in finding fault with my work, her criticisms sharp and personal. "Are you even qualified to handle these documents, mouse?" she sneered one day, dropping a stack of files onto my desk so hard the dust motes danced in the sunbeam. "This isn't some small-town library. A single mistake here could have consequences." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that I knew all about consequences, that a consequence was growing up without a family because of hers. But I just nodded, my eyes downcast. "I'll be more careful, Miss Blackwood." My breakthrough came from an unexpected place, Eleanor Blackwood herself. She had a habit of holding her charity committee meetings in the library, and I was often tasked with fetching specific books or documents for them. One afternoon, the meeting was about the gala commemorating the Foundation's 30th anniversary. They were discussing the keynote speech, the inspiring story of the Blackwoods' rise to prominence. "It's a shame we can't use the original portraits," one of the women sighed. "The ones before the rebranding. They had such character." Eleanor's smile was brittle. "Yes, a shame, but that era is best forgotten. We look to the future now." Her eyes flickered towards my office, and for a split second, I thought she saw right through me. The original portraits, the rebranding. It was a thread. That night, buried in the deepest, most neglected digital archives, I found it. A folder labeled Legacy Assets Archived. Inside were scanned images of old promotional material. And there it was, a portrait of a younger Alistar and Eleanor, standing proudly in front of a small, modest building. The sign above the door didn't say Blackwood Industries. It said Stonehaven Manufacturing. My parents had worked for a small parts supplier called Stonehaven. It was the reason they were on that road that night, a late shift. The news article never mentioned it. The connection ignited like a fire in my mind. I started digging into Stonehaven with a frantic, single-minded focus. The corporate records were a maze of acquisitions and mergers. Stonehaven was bought out by a larger company, which was then absorbed into another, until it was finally dissolved, its assets swallowed whole by a nascent Blackwood Industries. It was a corporate ghost, erased from history. But ghosts leave echoes. I found them in the form of old employee records scheduled for digital deletion. And there they were. Their names. My parents. Listed as dedicated, long-term employees of Stonehaven, their employment was terminated due to the closure of the facility. The date of the facility's official closure was 1 month after they died. The lie was unraveling, and the truth was uglier than I could imagined. They didn't just die in an accident. They were employees of a company Alistar Blackwood was systematically dismantling. Were they on their way to meet someone, to expose something? The questions multiplied, each one more terrifying than the last. I needed to get into Alistar's private study. It was the heart of the beast, a place even the housekeepers needed explicit permission to enter. The opportunity came when the entire family was scheduled to attend a high-profile charity auction across town, a mandatory public appearance. Using a copied keycard I had secretly fashioned weeks earlier, I slipped into the study. The air was thick with the scent of his arrogance. I went straight for his old physical filing cabinet, the one I'd heard him complain was too outdated to connect to the network. My hands trembled as I sifted through the files. And then I found it. A simple manila folder, unlabeled. Inside was a single typewritten document. It was an interim memo from Blackwood to his then partner. The subject, Stonehaven Acquisition. My eyes scanned the lines, my breath catching in my throat. It spoke of aggressive cost-cutting, of streamlining operations, of neutralizing liabilities, and then the line that stopped my heart. The whistleblower threat from the Stonehaven line managers, the Fosters, has been contained. The situation on the coastal road has ensured their silence. The final acquisition can proceed. The loss is regrettable, but necessary for the future. The Fosters. My parents. The situation on the coastal road. Contained. Regrettable, but necessary? The paper fell from my numb fingers. It wasn't an accident. It was a solution, a calculated decision. My parents had discovered something, corruption, fraud, something they were going to expose. And Alistair Blackwood hadn't just caused an accident, he had ordered their destruction. He had them removed. My loving, laughing parents were reduced to a liability, to be neutralized. The world tilted on its axis. The grief I had carried since childhood erupted into a white-hot supernova of rage. This was beyond betrayal. This was murder, cold, calculated, and dressed in a business suit. I heard the front gates opening. They were home early. I scrambled to put the file back, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. I slipped out of the study and back into the shadows of the hall, just as the family entered the foyer. Julian saw me. He was hanging back from the others, a frown on his face. "Maya, you're here late." I couldn't speak. I could barely look at him, the son of the man who had my parents killed. The blood of my family was on their family's hands. The kindness in his eyes now felt like the cruelest trick of all. "Are you okay?" he asked, taking a step closer, genuine concern in his voice. The compassion in his tone was the final straw. The dam inside me broke. I looked at him, my eyes filled with a tempest of emotions he could never understand. Grief, rage, and a devastating, impossible hurt. "No," I whispered, my voice cracking. "No, Julian, I'm not okay." And for the first time, I wasn't acting. The mask of Maya had shattered, and beneath it was just me, Alara, the orphan, the avenger. The game had changed. The plan for revenge was no longer about ruining their reputation or their wealth. It was about making Alistair Blackwood feel the same earth-shattering loss that he had inflicted on me. It was about destroying the empire he had built on my parents' graves, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that to do that, I would have to break the heart of the one person in this house who might not deserve to be broken.
There was a strange, cold clarity that comes after your world has ended for the second time. The first time, I was a child, lost and afraid. This time, I was a woman, forged in fire and hardened by truth. The grief was still there, a bottomless well inside me, but it was now frozen over with a layer of pure, unyielding purpose. Alistair Blackwood didn't just take my parents from me. He made a business decision to erase them, and I was about to make one to erase him. I avoided Julian. His texts went unanswered, his concerned glances met with a wall of icy professionalism. The pain in his eyes was a weapon I used against myself, a constant reminder of the collateral damage my war would cause. But I could not afford to care, not anymore. The memo was my key, but it wasn't enough. It was a piece of a puzzle. I needed the whole picture. I needed the partner, the one mentioned in the document. His name was Silas Thorne, and he had had a very public, very bitter falling out with Alistair years ago. He was the loose thread. Finding him was my next mission. He lived in reclusive retirement, a bitter old man nursing his own grudges. I went to him not as Maya, but as myself, Alara Foster, the daughter of the liabilities. He was frail, surrounded by the ghosts of his own ambition. When I showed him a copy of the memo, his eyes widened in fear and recognition. "He said it was an accident," Silas whispered, his voice like dry leaves.
He swore it. A tragic coincidence. But you knew, didn't you? I pressed, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. You knew my parents were going to expose the faulty safety reports you two had signed off on, the reports that would have sunk the Stonehaven deal and sent you both to prison. You knew they had to be silenced. He broke then. The whole sordid story tumbled out, how Alistair had arranged for a frightening incident to scare them, to make them drop the allegations, a car to run them off the road, but the driver was overzealous, the road was wet. It was meant to be a warning. It became a death sentence. Alistair had covered it up, paid off the driver, buried the investigation, and used the tragedy to strong-arm the remaining Stonehaven shareholders into selling for a pittance. I recorded every word. I had my confession. I had the weapon that would destroy Alistair Blackwood. The final act would be played out at the Foundation's 30th anniversary gala, the single most important night of the Blackwood social calendar, the night they would celebrate their legacy. I would make sure it was the night they watched it crumble to dust. The night of the gala, the mansion was transformed into a temple of opulence. Crystal glittered, champagne flowed, and the air was thick with the sound of empty laughter. I watched from the shadows, dressed in a simple black dress I'd bought with my own money, a soldier's uniform. I had given a copy of the recording and all the documents to a trusted, relentless journalist I had contacted weeks earlier. At exactly 9 p.m., as Alistair was scheduled to give his triumphant speech, it would all go live on a major news site. I saw Julian across the room. He looked handsome and miserable, trapped in his role as the golden heir. He saw me and began to make his way through the crowd, a determined look on his face. My heart hammered. I couldn't face him. Not now. "Maya," he said, finally reaching me. "We need to talk. Please, what's happening? What did I do?" "You didn't do anything, Julian," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "That's the problem." Before he could respond, Alistair Blackwood stepped up to the microphone, beaming at his adoring crowd. "Friends, family, thank you for celebrating with us. 30 years of success, of building a legacy we can all be proud of." This was it. I checked my phone, 9:01 p.m. I saw the notifications start to pop up on phones around the room. A murmur went through the crowd. Alistair, oblivious, continued his speech. A legacy built on hard work, integrity, and the massive screen behind him, meant to display a montage of Blackwood philanthropy, flickered. The family logo vanished, replaced by the stark headline of the news article, "Blackwood Empire Built on Murder. New evidence reveals fatal cover-up of whistleblower deaths." A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. The montage began to play, but it was the documents, the memo, the insurance payout, the photos of my parents that flashed across the screen, accompanied by Silas Thorne's rasping, damning confession playing over the speakers. The crowd erupted into chaos. Cameras flashed. Alistair stood frozen at the podium, his face a grotesque mask of shock and horror. He looked out at the sea of accusing faces, and his eyes found mine. In that moment, he didn't see Maya, the timid archivist. He saw the ghost of the people he had destroyed. He saw me, and he knew. Eleanor let out a choked sob. Cassandra was screaming at the technicians. And Julian was just staring at me, his face ashen. He had heard the recording. He had heard the name Foster's. He had heard what his father had done. He walked towards me, the crowd parting for him. "Elara," he whispered, the name a question and an accusation. "My name is Elara Foster. My parents were Thomas and Clara Foster, and your father didn't just kill them, he erased them for profit." The devastation on his face was absolute. It was the look of a man watching his entire world, his entire history, collapse into ash. I had wanted Alistair to feel my pain. I hadn't realized that in doing so, I would have to inflict a version of it on the one person in this family who might have been innocent. I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I walked out of the mansion, through the gilded gates, and into the night. The sounds of the scandalized party faded behind me. The revenge was complete. Alistair Blackwood was finished. His company would collapse. His reputation was in ruins. He would face criminal investigation. I had won. So why did it feel like such a hollow, empty victory? Revenge is a fire that consumes everything it touches, the target and the one who wields it. In the weeks that followed the gala, the fallout was swift and brutal. Alistair Blackwood was arrested on charges of conspiracy, fraud, and manslaughter. His empire crumbled, the stock plummeted, the vultures descended. The gilded family was stripped bare, exposed to the world for what they were, a beautiful facade hiding a rotten core. Eleanor filed for divorce. Cassandra, stripped of her inheritance and her social status, faded into obscurity. The media dubbed it the orphan's revenge, and for a while I was a minor celebrity, a symbol of justice. But the spotlight felt cold. The applause felt empty. I had gotten everything I wanted. Justice for my parents. The truth was out. Their names were cleared, their memories honored. The headstone in the quiet cemetery where they were buried finally told the true story of who they were. Beloved parents and courageous whistleblowers. But my soul felt scarred. I had become a master of deception. I had learned to lie, to manipulate, to wear a mask so well I almost forgot my own face. I had looked into the eyes of a man who cared for me, and I had shattered him, not because he was guilty, but because he was in the way. I thought of Julian often. I heard he had sold everything that was left of the Blackwood name, donated a significant portion to charities supporting orphans and corporate whistleblowers, and left the country. He had chosen a different path. He had chosen to build something new from the ashes, something honest. In destroying his father, I had, in a terrible roundabout way, perhaps set him free. One day, a small, plain package arrived at my door. There was no return address. Inside was a simple, leather-bound sketchbook. It was Julian's, and tucked into the front page was a note. Alara, I won't pretend to understand the pain that drove you. I can't imagine the weight you carried all those years. What my father did was monstrous, unforgivable. You were right to expose him. You gave two good people their story back. This sketchbook, it's full of the things I wanted to build. Honest things, beautiful things. I'm starting over, far from here. I don't know if you can ever forgive my family or the part I played in it by my silence, but I wanted you to know that the girl I knew in the garden, even if she was a fiction, she showed me a glimpse of something real. I hope you find your way back to what's real too. From Julian. I held the sketchbook in my hands and I cried. I cried for the lives lost, for the years stolen, for the love that was never given a chance to be real. I cried for the boy who grew up in a house of lies and for the girl who used lies as her weapon. So what is the moral of this story? That revenge is sweet? No, it's not. Revenge is a bitter medicine that leaves a lasting aftertaste. It gives you what you think you want, but it takes a piece of your humanity in return. The true lesson, the one I learned in the quiet after the storm, is this. The past can be a prison or it can be a foundation. You can let your pain define you, let it twist you into something you no longer recognize, or you can use it to build something new, something honest, something that honors the memory of those you lost without becoming a ghost yourself. My parents didn't die so I could live a life consumed by hatred. They died for the truth, and now I have to live for it. My name is Alara Foster. I am an orphan no longer. I am the daughter of Thomas and Clara, and I am finally, after a long and dark journey, ready to come home.